This week, Governor Rick Snyder signed the roads bill that he has waited to ink for years. The plan that raises gas tax and registration fees for a combined total of $600 million will be combined with $600 million in general fund revenues to come up with the $1.2 billion the governor says is needed to fix the roads. While it was all smiles at the signing ceremony, a few miles away, Democrats were blasting the plan they called the worst solution possible.
Well, this is the worst of all worlds. It increases taxes on those who can least afford it, on middle-class families and on seniors. It will not fix the roads, and at the same time, it will blow a huge hole in the budget that will jeopardize funding for education, public safety, and health care. This is a lose-lose-lose proposal. And again, it's important to keep in mind that this will not even get phased in for another 6 years until the year 2021, and in the meantime, the roads are going to continue to get worse and worse every year.
That Democrats didn't like the plan is not necessarily news, but
birthdays, normally a happy day.
The argument of politicizing the issue may have escalated when Democrats introduced new radio ads targeting Republican reps in marginal districts who voted in favor of the deal.
Birthday tax roads plan doesn't even fix the roads. Instead, it steals $800 million from schools and police to cut taxes for the wealthy.
That came just days after the Republican Speaker of the House made this claim on last week's To the Point, aimed at Democratic leader Grimel. First, Speaker Cotter, then Leader Grimel's response.
What I am convinced of is all of that time was time wasted because we saw those negotiations blown up by the minority leader, Tim Grimel, in the House. And it was so unfortunate because it was blown up over an issue that we agreed from the outset of the talks. I'm convinced that that was an effort to run time off the clock. This has become so politicized that I believe the Democratic leader wants to use our inability to get a road plan done to clobber Republicans in the next election.
Well, that's just not true, and the underlying assertion that he made is flatly false. I was very clear with everybody in the discussions from day one what my objections were. And if Speaker Cotter is suggesting otherwise, he either wasn't paying attention in the discussions or he's intentionally lying.
The idea that such a contentious issue is being used as a political wedge is not surprising, nor is the explanation of Michigan Democratic Party Chairman Brandon Dillon.
And Republicans are going to say, this doesn't have anything to do with policy, this has to do with taking back the House next year.
Well, we think it's going to be an issue that voters are going to care about, and we want to make sure that they understand what is actually in the package. The governor is going to sign this bill today, unfortunately. He can sign the bill in lipstick, but it's not going to change the fact that this is a really bad bill. And voters, whether they're in Holly Hughes' district or Tom Barrett's district or all across the state, we're going to make sure that they're all aware of it, because whether it's in a swing district or a district that is not as competitive, the policy is the same and it's bad.
Good morning and welcome to the Point. To be sure, that package of bills that's supposed to fix the roads is not a favorite of everyone. Obviously, Democrats don't like it, and there are plenty of Republicans that say it's a bad deal too. It wasn't the plan the governor started with. It wasn't the plan that anybody started with. It wasn't plan B or C or D. It was plan J or K or L. But there is a roads deal, and it is in place, and we talked to the governor about his thoughts on how it came to be. Well, Governor, every time we have sat at this table or any other table for the past several months, couple of years, we've talked about roads in one form or another, so I don't want to change our pattern. The difference is this time we can talk about a roads deal that's been agreed to by the House and Senate. We assume will be implemented. Tell me what your thought was as this finally came together.
Well, this is positive progress, Rick. It had been difficult to get something done from a legislative point of view, and this was an opportunity to say, let's advance things. This is about new additional revenue to make our roads better. If you look at it, I wanted something that was financially responsible. And I think we came up with a good compromise package that is better than not doing something that moves us forward, better roads.
We talked shortly after the bill first passed, and you pointed out that $600 million in the general fund expenditure will be something that is written into law. It's going to be there.
Yeah.
You also know what some of those people who are detractors of this plan say, particularly Democrats. They say that money is going to take away from other important considerations like education, or public safety, or whatever else might come out of that pile of money. What makes you think it will not?
Well, we've seen good economic growth over the last few years, Rick, and if we continue on that path, there should be resources so we don't have to cut anything. Again, as we grow, the pie gets bigger, so we can dedicate part of that pie towards roads. To give you an illustration of what we've done in other areas that are totally separate, but it illustrates the principle, in schools, for example, in K-12, we've put over $1 billion a year more towards the retirement programs, retirement and pension costs. That's something most people haven't noticed because we've had enough economic growth we could dedicate that while we are still making good investments in schools. So again, we can see this philosophy happen in other areas.
If you're moving forward, and this still is Michigan's economy, and we know historically, and I know one of the things that you've talked about is you don't want to repeat these same cyclical ebbs and flows, but I don't know how you totally protect against them. What happens if you hit one of those bumps in 5 years down there?
Well, people always need to reevaluate if you have a major change in circumstance, but if that happened in any case, we would have challenges. I mean, that doesn't make you wouldn't be challenged in some fashion. It depends what it is. So instead of worrying about every scenario, all our forecasts show we're on a good positive path. We should have incremental resources to invest in this. And should we move forward if we have an outlook that looks that good?
You are not a slave to social media, but we all have to be part of social media, and you have no doubt heard or seen that there are a lot of people, not just Democrats who didn't by and large vote for this plan, but there are Republicans from the more conservative factions who say, wait a minute, this is not the plan we wanted. In fact, many of them like to say this is the plan they voted down. I should point out that this is far different than the plan they voted down, but the idea is they think that the vote said we don't want to raise taxes, and in some form, taxes and fees are being raised.
Yeah, well, again, if you look at this was a good compromise outcome. On one hand, we had people saying you shouldn't be using any general fund, and we had other people saying you should do it all through the general fund. So this was a good balance. This is the way the legislative process should work. One thing we should be proud of, if you step back and look at it, Rick, this is the largest investment in transportation in the last 50 years in our state. The last time they did something was back in '97. Inflation adjusted, it was less than a nickel a gallon. This is 7 cents plus registration fees. So this is the largest investment been made in 50 years. The registration fee hadn't changed for 30 years. So let's be happy about the positive progress we're showing, and let's work on having a good outcome because better roads make for a better economy and more jobs.
I don't want to get too far in the weeds with the CPA because you'll leave me behind in a hurry, but this is indexed, right?
Yeah.
This gas tax
one of the
indexed.
benefits we really did, Rick, and it doesn't take place for a number of years because it ramps up, is eventually it'll be inflation adjusted with respect to the fuels tax piece of it, which is something that if it would have been done in '97, we probably wouldn't be having all the discussions we had to have. Because the buying power declined that much over 20 years or 15 years. So this is something to say this could be a longer term solution and a smart piece we've learned from past actions.
Okay, what have you learned from this? This has been a long slog for you, and you finally get down to the end of the process that happened on Election Day, which made for a very busy day in Lansing and around the state. But what do you take away from this as the governor of the state of Michigan and your continuing exercise in working with the legislature?
Well, this is relentless positive action with a little more emphasis on the relentless part. But if you really look at it, it really makes the point that it's difficult from a legislative point of view to talk about increasing revenue. Whether it be a gas tax or a registration fee, these are difficult votes for people to take. And the key thing is people have to see them not as spending money, but as a smart investment. So this is the dialogue that it took a couple years for people to recognize our roads are bad enough that we need to do something, and we should be doing it not at the expense of other things. And so that's what this compromise solution does. Again, it's the largest investment we've made in 50 years. That's very positive progress.
And finally, I don't want to spend the whole show talking about this because there are other important things I know are on the table out there. The one other criticism that I have heard most often is that this isn't enough money because it doesn't roll out immediately. We had Speaker Cotter on last week, and he said he actually thought that was a good thing because you don't dump so much money out there that you create artificial inflation with projects. But this does get up to the $1.2 billion that you had talked about. Is that, in your opinion, going to be enough? Obviously, it's $1.2 billion that you didn't have before.
No, it's a positive movement. And this is where people can argue one side or the other. Again, people on both extremes aren't going to be happy, but this is a good compromise that, again, adds incremental resources that we didn't have before to improve our roads, which we all knew we need to invest in. So this is a smart investment. Let's be proud of it. Let's move on, and let's take on other tough issues.
So 1 week after it passed, Governor Snyder signed that roads bill. But don't look for your taxes to go up right away. That gas tax increase of 7.3 cents, that won't happen until January of 2017. The same goes for the increase in registration fees. Now, you can bet there'll be a lot of talk about what happened and is this a good deal or a bad deal between now and next November's election. But we also know that at least for now, the idea of having to pass a roads bill is behind the legislature, and the governor says there's much more to do. We'll talk about that with him when we continue To the Point. Welcome back to the Point. This past week, when Governor Rick Snyder signed those roads bills, he checked one of the boxes on his legislative agenda, but he's not done, not by a long shot. In fact, there are a number of other priorities that he wanted to talk about when we sat down just last week. Well, the legislature is going to take a few days off, but when they come back, I know there are a number of things that you would like to get worked on this year or early next. Talk to me about criminal justice reform. You've already done a special message. You talked about some of the priorities that you see there. Have you started to see places where the legislature can work with you on some of those issues that you would like to see done?
Yeah, there's a whole series of bills that is making good progress. There are a couple that are raising more questions, presumptive parole being probably the one that's gained the most attention, but the package is moving forward, which it should. This is about smart justice, Rick. This is not about being weak on crime, but saying we can invest resources smarter in the system than we do today. We spend too much money just locking people up. We don't spend enough on mental health on the front end, on how to do alternative programs for people, on some of the criminal justice things I'd like to do on the front side, but also on prisoner reentry. We can do more there because if someone served their time, if they paid their price to society, the more we can be successful at getting them to reenter society and not go back. That's one of the best ways we can save money on this whole cycle of criminal justice.
One of the things that I don't think people always consider, you say we spend a lot of money on corrections, for example. If you look at the state of Michigan's budget at $54 billion, there's about $9.7 billion of that that's in the general fund. Out of that general fund budget, there's $2 billion that goes to corrections. So when you think about the disposable money that the state actually has, that is a very big percentage indeed.
It is, but I can tell you we've made huge improvements since I've been governor. One of the things that most people don't get a chance to see is, again, being fiscally responsible. We weren't properly funding all our retirement costs in terms of post-retirement medical, all those things for people in the system. So we've actually cut about $300 million from that $2 billion, even more than $300 million. But we've now put that into this retirement savings investment. So basically the number hasn't changed dramatically, but now we're funding our long-term liabilities the way we should have been doing it before. So that's a net positive. The other thing is, as I said, I think we can improve programs to bring costs down by doing smarter justice.
When you look at that package, and again, there's never, it has to be done this date, but is this something that gets done this fall, or are you still working on this next spring?
Well, I hope we can get it done. I like to work quickly, but I appreciate the legislators and the challenges, all the other things they're adjusting. So the big thing is we got roads done. We have a major package going on in Detroit education soon. This criminal justice one is on a positive path, and we're making some progress on energy policy for the long term.
Which is our next place I want to go, because I've done a number of shows both here and in Lansing on the energy policy. I find it fascinating because the last time around the emphasis was very much about renewables, a renewable portfolio, having mandates in place, 10% by this year if I remember, and we are in that neighborhood, right?
Pretty close. We've made it.
So this new package that I've been looking at, and I don't pretend to know all the ins and outs, and I know just last week something came out of the House Energy Panel that did include some new renewable suggestions, not mandates, but it's 30% by 2025?
It's to create some guidelines and not mandates, because the way I view it is we need a more adaptable policy, because there are at least two things in the future we don't know. Federal energy policy, which we need a federal energy policy. The other one is market prices. What are the prices for these various products? And we've seen wide fluctuations in costs for different sources of energy. So the thing we did in this message that I did earlier this year was emphasize, first of all, let's reduce our energy waste. The energy that we don't need to generate is the best savings of all. So we've got some strong goals there. But within the context of generation, we're going to move away from coal. Those decisions have already been made by utilities and other parties. Our coal percentage will go down, which is a good thing. So we'll be much greener, and the question is how do you provide that? I think it's a combination of natural gas and renewables. with really having it be flexible based on market prices and other conditions. So our whole philosophy is, how do you have an adaptable policy, improve affordability, improve reliability, and better environmental sustainability? Aren't those all good things?
The question, though, is how do you contain costs and how do you keep the costs from becoming prohibitive? Because in the ramp up to renewable energy, there's a big infrastructure investment. There's the storage question. There are all of those kind of things. As you've pointed out in the past, the sun doesn't always shine in Michigan, and consequently, solar is not as reliable. You obviously have wind energy, but you have to have the ability to get that there. How do you keep those costs from encroaching on the overall electric grid, particularly as you take out 9 coal-powered plants, if they're replaced by natural gas, and if natural gas goes up? I mean, you could really be in a catch-22.
Well, that's why I view it as a balance. It's a portfolio. There's not just the answer. That's why I wanted to establish this range, really based on market conditions and costs and features. We do have to replace the generation capacity in some fashion. The coal is going away. That's over. So it's really a case, do we invest more in natural gas, wind, or solar, or some other options? The good part is they're all very competitive today. So in terms of choices, they're good choices, but as you said, then you have to say what's kind of permanent load, base load, because renewables don't always solve that problem. There's a lot of factors and variables, but the Michigan Public Service Commission has been doing a great job, and we created the Energy Agency also to help work with them in terms of talking about energy resources in Michigan. So we've got great people that I think we can do this very smartly.
Now, one of the things that many people have called or emailed or put on social media after every show I do about this new energy policy is, why are they, meaning you and the legislature presumably, trying to destroy choice? Right now there's a 10% choice market in electric in the state. If I understand it correctly, the bill that the House passed out of committee last week maintains that. Is that right?
Yeah, my goal isn't to destroy choice. It's to make, whatever you choose, you need to be able to back up your choice, is really the question. Because our system today isn't as fair as it should be. Because in some ways we're counting on everyone else to be your backup. If you happen to be choice, you can go say, I have a supplier, but there's no assurance they're going to be able to supply. So what we're talking about is keeping the same kind of limit, the 10%, but asking people to say, if you're on that piece, you need to talk to your supplier about them making sure there's a firm commitment that they're going to actually be able to provide power for the next few years. If not, there's a problem, because we don't want to force everyone else to subsidize you by having to build more capacity to back you up in case you run out or don't have a supply.
So in other words, the theory is that if you've got 10% of the people who are actually taking that choice policy, but you require the utilities to be able to take them over if something goes wrong or if they want to come back, then the utilities would have to have 10% extra that's just out there not being used.
Well, and that's being paid for by everybody else, and that's not right. So the way I view it is I'm happy to have that dialogue, but people need to pay their fair share. So as people being financially responsible for whatever option they choose within the limits we've set aside. And I think it's a smarter policy than what we have today.
As always, we never have a shortage of topics. Let's go to the Detroit Public Schools. Yeah. This is an area that goes hand in hand with another long-term goal of yours, and that's doing something about the city of Detroit. And you have highlighted any number of things that have started to go right there. And I think that many people would agree, and also agree that the city's got a long way to go. It's not going to be overnight, and you said that before too. But with that said, any community, a strong community, has got to have a strong public school system, or at least that's always been our thinking. What do we need to do from your perspective with Detroit Public Schools, and what kind of money are we talking?
Yeah, well, there's 2 or 3 steps. And we need to start by, how do we get a better education for 100,000 plus kids? Whether they're in Detroit Public Schools or charter schools. We need to increase the bar of performance and accountability for all schools in Detroit and make that market work. As part of that, Detroit Public Schools has large legacy debt. That's taking away from resources in the classroom. So we need to solve that problem. So we've talked about creating an old school district to keep the debt, a new school district without the debt. That would require a state investment of about $715 million over about 10 years. So that's a significant investment. But it would solve the problem in terms of getting that working when you combine it with creating what we call the Detroit Education Commission, which is to look both at DPS schools, charter schools, any kind of school, and say, how do we get better accountability and performance? So let's think of the kids first. Let's improve the opportunity for the kids to be successful. Let's resolve a legacy financial problem that's been there for a long time and move forward. And again, much like we talked about roads, let's do it in a way where it doesn't come at the expense of cutting anything in the state in terms of an incremental investment.
Well, two things. When you were first describing this and you talk about this old debt and this old school system, it sounds a little bit like GM, that you're going to take the toxic debt.
It is very much like the GM model. Without going through bankruptcy, it's a very similar model. And the reason I say that is to do it in a structured fashion. If we don't do something and this ends up in litigation in court and other things, there's a whole lot of that debt that will come back to be borne most likely by the state of Michigan or other school districts in the state because of pension liabilities and such that could cost a whole lot more money than this solution. So some people will say, I don't like to do any of it, but to do it in an uncontrolled fashion, in a much more expensive fashion, would be a much worse outcome. So let's do it in a smart, financially managed way.
And this also reminds me a little bit of what you did when you were trying to take care of the finances of Detroit. You had to make deals with a number of different stakeholders so you could do it in such a way that you didn't end up with the litigation cost. Okay, so if this is going to take $715 million over here to take care of this old debt, where does that money come from?
Well, again, I think if you look at our forecast for how we're doing financially at the state, we have the resources to do that so we can continue to have pretty much a normal investment pattern for the schools of Michigan. So it would be incremental dollars on top of that. So there won't be any cuts. It would simply say, again, as we pay that off, then we'd have more resources for every school district. But in the meantime, let's make this investment. Let's take care of this legacy liability.
I got about 3 minutes left. You got about 3 years left. And here is what we talked about on Mackinac Island. You talked about the urgency you felt every day because you're very aware that you've got 3 years left to get things done. You've just come through this roads deal. You're looking at this Detroit Public Schools plan. The energy plan may be somewhat easier. I'm not going to make any predictions on that yet, but it may be. There are many consequential things you want to get done. How do you approach this after, and I harken back to the roads thing because that was just a very long campaign to get that done. You finally are there. Do you just immediately go headlong into the other thing, or do you take a breath, or do you reevaluate? What is your process?
No, you keep pushing forward. That's the relentless positive action philosophy. And what I've done, if people go back and look, every State of the State address, I really give a roadmap for the whole year and sort of outline. And what we've done systematically over the years is sort of go in rotation from the largest issues to the next issues and done that in a systematic fashion, from tax reform to regulatory reform, to public health, human health, criminal justice, to energy. Again, we've just gone through the circle. Education, all these, and some of them we come back and hit 2 or 3 times because we need to make incremental reforms each time. So that's what I'm proud of. We are reinventing Michigan. And the most important thing of all is Michiganders are working better together than they have for decades. I mean, our problem is we fought and blamed each other too much. But if you look at when we work together, we do incredible things, and let's keep that up.
I would just mention in that vein that it was with little fanfare that the mayor of Detroit happened to be in the Capitol building on the night the roads bill passed, which indicated to me that there might have been some bipartisan conversations going on there, too.
Yeah, well, again, people want to solve problems, and that's what we should focus on. Most of these problems are common sense, and we let politics get in the way too often. Let's focus on common sense solutions. I don't believe in blaming anyone or fighting with anyone. You hired me to fix the problem, solve the problem, and move forward.
Governor, thank you as always. Appreciate your time.
Great to be with you, Rick.
We're not done talking about roads just yet. Next week, Tim Grimel, the representative who is the leader of the Democrats in the House, will have plenty to say about his view of why this roads deal is a bad deal. That's when he's our guest next week. We'll be back with more To the Point. So after years of discussion and more than 12 months of legislative wrangling, a roads deal is done. Yes, it will cost you more at the pump. It will cost you more when you register your car. And it means that $600 million will come out of the general fund, which could cost other programs in the state, at least ultimately. But will it fix the roads? For the next few years, that's what we'll be watching as you watch us every Sunday morning at 10 for To the Point.